one of our favorite things is every time you meet whatever international person who loves Rush, you go, have you heard Battle Scar? And inevitably the answer is usually like, what's Battle Scar? And you can't wait to change their life. Hello.
Hey, Todd. How's it going?
Great. How are you?
Good.
Okay, now how do okay, hang on. Here's start the video.
Oh, I was going to say, if you don't want to do video, that's fine. This is just audio.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. Well, then that's fine. Well, I'm on now.
I like the Stormtrooper behind you, though.
Yeah, I want to make sure you see guitars, a Devo jacket, and a Stormtrooper helmet.
Hell yeah, I can dig on that.
It says a lot about, I think there's actually, what else? Oh, there's an Adam West Batman mask right there, too. It's embarrassing. It's like a used toy store / guitar shop in here, yeah.
Hey, well, it's funny looking behind you. I'm like, yeah, it does look like you're sitting in a music store right now.
My friends always say, are you hiding out into Sam Ash or something? I'm like, my father went, let's go one of those slat walls. He comes over and we put up the slat wall and we get the things. And next thing you know, I've got a Guitar Center behind me.
That's great. That's great. I can dig it.
Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Windsor, Ontario.
Ah, beautiful. I was just up in Hamilton just before Christmas.
Was that with Slash or something else?
No, my wife's family is from around there. So we were up there. We did pre-Christmas there, and then we went to Vancouver, West Coast for my family. So yeah, we're bi-coastal, but we don't even live in either place anymore. So
that's so funny. Yeah, you're in what, LA right now?
I'm in Vegas. Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Oh, yeah. Which is basically the new LA.
Kind of. Yeah. It's either Vegas or Nashville these days. It seems like, but my whole world is in Los Angeles. So I stay in what I call the distant suburb of Los Angeles, Las Vegas. Yeah. Like the real estate's going up. The traffic's getting worse. It's like everybody's coming out here. It's like, I keep wanting to say, like, put a sign up and just kind of go like, we're full.
So when I do these, I'd like to start at the beginning of you as a musician and then work our way up to the new record. So starting from way back, where did you grow up and how did you get started in music? Well,
that's the interesting thing. I was born in Estevan, Saskatchewan. We moved immediately to northern Manitoba to a town called Lynn Lake, where Tom Cochrane was born, oddly enough.
Oh, that's hilarious. Wow.
I didn't even know that until like years later, like not living there anymore. We left there when I was about 13, back to Saskatchewan to a town called Lanigan. And that was cool because it was just outside of Saskatoon, about an hour out of Saskatoon. So at least I was close to a city. I could go and see, I saw Loverboy and Bryan Adams and all the concerts, you know what I mean? Because living in northern Manitoba was like the Irish Rovers.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah, there was just nothing that you could, there just wasn't a thing. So, it was good to be back in Saskatchewan. And from there, it was sort of, putting together the Age of Electric in Saskatchewan. I'd played on the road in a bunch of bar bands for years. Started off playing at high school dances as a kid. Did you start, because I know you play bass and guitar. What did you start out as? Was it a guitar player? Well, I always tell this story. I picked up a few chords on my dad's guitar. So he's like, okay, cool. So they gave me an Epiphone acoustic. And then in his weird reasoning was like, well, we got a guitar. Let's get you a bass. Oh, that's funny. It's just the strange, like not even let's just get you an electric guitar. It was like, no, let's get you a bass. So bought a Gibson EB3, which I have in storage, but basically an SG bass. And then it was, right from there, I was immediately a bass player. So that's what was so funny when I started playing bass in Slash. Everybody's like, it's weird that you're playing bass. And I was like, I started as a bass player. Really, I played bass up until playing in Age of Electric with my brother, because my brother in the meantime had picked up the bass and we wanted to play together. So I said, okay, well, I'll just move out and play rhythm guitar and sing, you know what I mean? Sort of thing. So in reality, I was sort of a bass player by default, largely because I don't know what it's like now for kids, but back then it was sort of like everybody wanted to be a guitar player or a drummer. It's still the same. Yeah, I assume so. Yeah. I don't even know if anybody wants to be a lead singer per se. I think that's usually just sort of left to your one friend who's full of personality and maybe not so much of a voice sometimes, but guitar playing. Hey, you know, it's funny. In my band, it was the exact same thing. Years ago, we all looked at each other and went, all right, so who's going to do the singing thing? And eventually it just kind of falls on you, right? That's exactly what happened to me. But it's funny, the bass guitar thing you talk about, because the bass player in my band is the same thing. He's sort of a dual bass player and guitar player, just sort of did both the same, but it's like, you're a very good guitar player, but it's like, you can do stuff on bass I can't do. You're the bass player. I will say that it's an acquired skill. I know plenty of these like great guitar players who pick up a bass and it just never feels right. It never quite sounds right. And a lot of them are knowledgeable enough to know that that's true within themselves. And I think there's quite a few of us that have that ability to kind of like sort of pick up the instrument and kind of like know what you're supposed to do on that instrument. I'm not Geddy Lee, I mean, I'm not from that school of like super flashy skills bass player. I like just a kind of rock solid bass kind of thing. That's kind of what I've always sort of been attracted to. And that's what I do. But it still requires a certain pocket and a certain sort of feel and a certain sort of vibe. And that guitar players often have a totally different feel entirely.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same thing when I pick up a bass. It's like, it's a guitar player playing bass as opposed to someone who, I understand how to play bass and I understand you got to lock in with the drums and whatever. But especially if that's not what you do primarily, there's a certain thing to be said for someone who's playing bass as a proper bass player.
100%.
Your average person probably can't tell, but someone who knows music goes, no, there's something off here. It's right, but it's not quite it.
That's absolutely true. And I mean, like, I think that's true for a lot of like great guitar players who just kind of like, they're better off having a guy who plays bass. It's like they could probably appropriate bass for say a demo or something like that, but I don't think they'd want to be like, call themselves a bass player.
Exactly. So I gotta say, when doing research for this interview, I had so much fun going back and delving into your past because I didn't realize how many songs you wrote that I loved as I was getting into music.
Oh, wow.
So I'd like to ask you about, you mentioned them earlier, but the Age of Electric. How did you guys form and get started?
Well, I had a band, a bar band, and Kurt Dahl, our drummer, ended up coming out and roadieing for us. And we hit it off because I was so much younger than everybody else in the band. Those guys were like, starting to couple up and become adults. And I was sort of this young jackass. And then, hey, there's this other young jackass. And we both sort of had that thing of like, he had a younger brother who played guitar. He was a drummer. And I was like, my younger brother plays bass. And I mean, that conversation happened probably 2 years before we ever actually kind of pulled the trigger on it. The big thing was that he and I had just gotten out of high school and they were still in high school. So there was sort of like, well, we're not going to move back to our parents' house and, wait for them to get out of school or anything like that. So we just I went to Alberta and played in bar bands, and Kurt went around the Winnipeg area and played in bar bands, and then always sort of kept in touch. And then when the day happened where it was just always sort of a given that at some point when the brothers were kind of graduating, we would reconvene and put the band together. So we did. And it was really not a whole lot of thought put in it. It's weird because just last week, one of our songs from the 95 album ended up on an episode of Letterkenny, the TV show. And it's such a weird...
I haven't heard the new season yet, or haven't seen the new season, so I'm going to have to keep an eye out for that.
It's episode 2, and I'm like, it's just a surreal thing that all these years later, it sort of like lives on in its own way.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's funny, being a Canadian kid in the 90s into rock music. I mean, like, I can't tell you how many hundreds of times we played Remote Control, I mean, that song, and that was always one of our favorites on what was really a great compilation of songs.
Big Shiny Tunes 2 was the big...
That's it, yeah.
Big connector for that, yeah. There's a diamond... I have a diamond record on my wall out there. I don't have any other diamond records. It's that Big Shiny Tunes 2, Remote Control. It's crazy.
That's unreal. I can't believe... I mean, I believe it because everybody I knew had it back then, so...
I had no idea, until like years later, people would be like, the impact of that particular compilation was a massive thing.
Oh, it's huge. Yeah, like I say, I mean, the songs on that, I mean, still, you do, a 90s night, half of those songs are going to be in it, Crazy.
100%, yeah.
So tell me about doing Make a Pest a Pet and working with Gil Norton, who produced so many bands from that era. Tell me about working with him as a producer.
I love that you brought that up. That's so interesting. He came in for we had recorded the whole record pretty much. And then there was that sort of record company conversation of like, I don't know if we hear the single, that kind of conversation you're always going to roll your eyes at. But, and it was like, I think it was our idea. It was kind of like, well, can we get Gil Norton? We were big fans of his. The funniest thing is I remember sitting outside of our rehearsal space with him in his rental car and him playing me demos for what would become the new Foo Fighters record, the second one. And it was very surreal because, at the time it was like still, you mean Dave from Nirvana's new band? The first album had been out and they'd already been established as what it was. But, that's who Gil was. He did The Color and the Shape. And it was like, went on to be sort of like the big instrumental record for those guys. So he came in and he did I Don't Mind and a song called Blow Up that Ryan sang, Ryan Dahl.
Yeah.
And, so we'd already had remote. So it's kind of funny when they say, well, we don't really have a single. Well, we already have remote control, but you know, it definitely added a lot. And it's so funny how, like, I always hear about this in films and in television, how actors and directors and crew people will work together so intimately and be so like in each other's pockets and really kind of like get along and then never see each other again. And I felt like that was kind of the case with Gil. In so many cases, I'm pretty good at keeping in touch with people. I'm the kind of guy that reaches out and goes, hey, you know, happy birthday, Merry Christmas, whatever. I've got a whole big life of my own too. It's impossible to keep in touch with everybody, but Gil is somebody I lost track of a long time ago because that's way before the advent of social media of any sort. Loved the guy, got along great. He's from Liverpool originally. So, I mean, and the wealth of music that he'd made, it was just kind of a constant like fascination, but he did great work. We did those 2 songs, that record. It was such an interesting thing because the band was very fractured at that time because, you know, I was already kind of doing other things and Kurt and Ryan had Limb Lifter, although it was always more Ryan. And, the Make a Pest a Pet record was very weirdly made in that it was sort of like, we were doing it for the kids, you know what I mean? We were kind of like a couple that, you know, and it wasn't necessarily, and people like to think that it was like the Kernses versus the Dolls. It wasn't at all. It was just very sort of like, the band had been together a long time. We had been in each other's pockets for, like I say, we'd been talking about the band for probably 15 years and had been playing together for 10. So it just sort of like, you're not the same person you were when you were 17 to when you're 27.
Of course.
And if we were smarter, we would have been able to kind of say, let's just go off and do other things and then we'll reconvene on the mothership. But I think, you know, being arrogant, young, passive aggressive Canadians, it was just sort of like, I'm going to my corner, you go to your corner. And to be honest, we were back writing songs together, Ryan and I, only a couple of years later. It just happened to be sort of both of us wrapped up in other things that we were doing at the time. And then of course, being in the States and the Slash and all that kind of stuff sort of took into another area. So it's very interesting to imagine if that hadn't happened, if Age would have kind of sort of reunited in some other fashion, even though we did kind of do another run at it around 2015. We started to kind of be active for a couple of years and the 20th anniversary type stuff for the 97 record, Make a Pest a Pet and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Now, tell me this. Now, I had no idea you played in this next band until I was doing research for this, but back in the early 2000s, I loved the song Before My Time by Static and Stereo.
Oh, thank you.
And I remember seeing you guys on Mike Bullard. And I don't know what that would have been, 01, 02, 03, something like that.
I think 01 or 02, maybe. Probably 01.
Yeah, I remember seeing it, liking the song, and it's so funny because I remember at the time, there's you with a flying V and long hair, which didn't exist in rock music back then, you know, like trying to explain this to kids nowadays. It's like, no, you don't understand. Rock was kind of dead, or it was at least very different back then.
It was frowned upon, I think more was the...
Yeah, so I remember seeing that and going like the song, I'm like, oh, it was cool. And then back then, the internet wasn't what it was either, so I just went, oh, okay. I don't know what that was, but I guess I'll never see it. And then I think it was like 2 days later, stumbled on it on Much Music.
Right.
So was able to go, oh, okay, at the end of the thing, it shows you who it is and perfect, right? So tell me about that band and doing that record and all that. Like, I think that was all you guys did, right? It was one album?
Yeah, I always laugh. It's kind of like the Sex Pistols. We did one record and called it a night. It was a weird time because you're talking about basically... After the fact, I remember like having a conversation with a friend about Edgefest. And I said, you know what's really interesting? In the moment that I was talking about it, I said, none of those bands exist anymore. I Mother Earth had split up. Moist had split up. Their Matthew Good band was now just Matthew Good. Tea Party had broken up for a while. It was like, there was a weird, beautiful moment in the 90s where there was all this great music happening. And you had an infrastructure in Canada that could support a career. And then with downloading and everything else, and just this sort of shift in the music industry, it just changed everything, you know, very quickly overnight, because it was bizarre for us to have witnessed in real time, you know, that like 3 years before it was this and then now it's this, you know, it was sort of like having, a song that's doing really well in the charts. People are coming to your shows, but it's just not translating into sales. And the labels are flailing, it's like no one knows what to do about it. They're kind of like, the perfect example is a few years before they were taking away they were saying, you can't sell CDs and stuff outside, off the stage, out of the van kind of thing anymore, because we have to be able to kind of keep track of how these recordings are going to, or how these sales are going to work. And I'm like, okay, that's how it's got to be done. And then all of a sudden Static and Stereo comes out and it's like, here's your CDs to sell on the road. And you're kind of like,
that's so funny. Yeah, like you say, it's so true, because I totally remember that transition too, where you had one set of music and then it was literally a few years later, everything went very almost Linkin Park and whatever, and it just shifted as downloading happened.
Absolutely. And I think that's kind of the interesting thing to have witnessed in real time. It was as interesting as witnessing, I don't know, the death of hair metal and all that kind of stuff. And it was very brief. Like, I mean, you have to keep in mind that, that whole thing was, that whole 90s beautiful moment in Canadian rock was so brief and then just kind of over. That's music for you, though,
Oh, for sure. Yeah, that's like whatever's popular now may not be in 5 years. Which
exactly. Yeah.
is funny. It's, like most of the musicians I interview were, like 80s glam metal guys. And it's like, that's the one genre that it may not be as popular as it was, but it refuses to die.
100%. In fact, it's sort of like, it's boomeranged back in a weird way where now it's, like we're seeing it in, in fucking, Poison is playing in football stadiums with Motley Crue and everybody. You're like, there you go.
Yeah.
If you just stick around long enough, you're a legend.
It's so funny. Like, I saw you at Heavy Montreal with Slash, I don't know, 3-4 years ago, whatever.
Yeah. Sure, yeah.
Actually talked with you backstage at that show too.
Oh, great.
But, I mean, I remember sitting there and most of the people watching, and, I'm sitting there with kids who are about 10, 15 years younger than me.
Yeah.
In their late teens, early 20s. And they're sitting, they knew every word to every song, you know? Like, it's like, I know some of Slash's solo stuff, but I was diehard GNR guy back in the day.
Absolutely.
But it's so funny that, like Night Train comes on and there's certain people, most of the crowd knows it, but these kids knew none of it. But as soon as Callie comes on or some of his solo stuff and they're singing every word, and I'm like, wow, it's so funny. The shift in dynamic with this crowd, because you've got a lot of people who probably grew up on Guitar Hero who know the newer stuff.
That's exactly it. It's bizarre. In Slash's band, that experience has been so bizarre because you're exactly right. Like, we did not expect it to be such a youthful audience. I mean, I was kind of like, I remember we did an Ozzy tour and the audience was so much older. I was quite surprised.
Funny enough, that was the first time I think I saw you live, and I saw that tour. It was fantastic.
Oh yeah, that was great. Yeah, I had a blast on that.
That would have been maybe, I don't know, 2011.
2011, yeah, 100%, yeah. But then you do the but for whatever reason, like you say, with Guitar Hero and all that kind of stuff, it definitely changed the perception on someone like Slash. It definitely brought in a younger audience for sure.
Yeah, it was one of those things. I was not expecting that, because it was a very mixed crowd at that festival, but it's like, all the kids went to see Slash. It was the funniest thing.
Yeah, I mean, he's like fucking Mickey Mouse or something. He's like not a human being anymore. He's like a character, you know what I mean?
It's the top hat, I think.
I think it is, yeah. The whole silhouette really kind of, the hair, the whole thing works, yeah.
So tell me this now. So one of the first ways, like other than knowing the bands you were in, but actually being aware of you as a musician, was seeing a video of you sing with Kim Mitchel doing Battlestar. Or Battlescar, not Star.
Battlescar Galactica. I was kidding.
Yeah. Tell me about singing that song and getting to do that with him. Like, had you guys rehearsed before you went up to do it?
This is the funny thing about that, is we played in, I think it was London, Ontario, Slash, and Kim was on the bill. And the drummer, Chris Sutherland, who now plays in Streetheart and a bunch of things, is a Winnipeg guy and an old friend. And he goes, let's do Battlescar. And Fitz and I are both like, fuck yeah. But we didn't go over it at all. Like, that's the funny thing about it, is we just went up and played it, and it's just sort of in there, you know what I mean? Like that kind of like, I'll do the Getty bits, which Peter Fredette does an amazing job of as well. But Peter's amazing. He's like, sing it. So I just go up there and I scream it out, and it's like one of my all-time favorite songs. And as a Canadian, it's just sort of like a rite of passage in a way.
Yeah.
It's one of our favorite things is every time you meet an American or whatever international person who loves Rush, you go, have you heard Battle Scar? And inevitably the answer is usually like, what's Battle Scar? And you go, and you can't wait to change their life. And it does. We'll just go, what the fuck, And so for me, it was just like, it's like so many things. Like, I just get up and I sing it. I fucking love it. And then years later, it lives on the internet or on YouTube and just keeps appearing as like, oh my God, dude, this thing's fucking crazy. And I'm like, yeah, that was fun. I mean, it's just this weird, like, to me, it's just like, it's a blast. But, you get a lot of love for being able to kind of like interpret something like that, that's such a great moment. And getting to do it with Kim, who's I don't hate, but I always feel very uncomfortable calling guys like Kim a friend, Lemmy or any of these guys that we kind of know or knew. It always felt like I'll never call these legends my friend. They're too much heroes to me to be that presumptuous, but I definitely love them to death,
Yeah. Oh, for sure. No, it's funny, the whole Rush thing, because I probably have run out of fingers and toes of people I've turned on to Battle Scar.
Me too.
Who are diehard Rush fans and know nothing of Max Webster. And it's like, they were brothers in the 70s. How do you not know? But again, if you're not Canadian, you don't know.
And that particular performance, Geddy and Neil on that song are like, peak performance Geddy Lee, peak performance Neil Peart. Obviously the other aspects of that song too. I mean, it's just like hearing that kind of like, holy shit, like that crossover from 70s to 80s Rush mixed with Max Webster is a beautiful recipe.
Yeah. A beautiful moment in Canadian rock, really.
100%.
Okay, we are quickly running out of time. So, all right. So Heroes and Monsters, you've got a killer new record out, coming out on Frontiers Records. And you're with Will Hunt from Evanescence and all the other things he's done. Steph Burns, Huey Lewis, Alice Cooper.
Most importantly, Huey Lewis. That's always my point.
Yes, this is true. So, I got to say, though, the sound is really unique because you've got a lot of sort of Slash. You definitely bring that sort of, like, even just hearing it without knowing you were in it, I'd go, there's something about modern Slash in there. I can feel it,
Yeah, I would agree with that.
But, I mean, there's also, I hear a bit of Age of Electric and Static and Stereo, but it's heavier and modernized. Like, tell me about how this record came together.
That's such an interesting. It would be really a lot to say that any of that would be anything that could be brought to it up front. Do you know what I mean? Like it's something that couldn't be thought about or talked about or even planned. It's sort of like, Will's been an old friend. He's an amazing talent. Even though like he mixed the record, he is involved in writing a ton, which is, I mean, generally drummers get the rep of just being, he plays drums, unless you're Dave Grohl or whatever. Yeah. But, and then, just sort of, the two of them had been sort of commiserating on doing something, and Will's an old friend. So he just called up and said, what do you think about knocking some ideas around? This is, keep in mind during the lockdown, right? So we're all sitting around there. I'm like, I leaned right into it. The first couple of weeks, the first month of lockdown, I'm sort of like, I should be doing something. I should be calling somebody. I should be, and then like one day it sort of it finally settles in that I don't have to do anything. I don't have to be anywhere. And I'm just kind of like, this is glorious. So I leaned right into it. And then, when then somebody calls and goes, hey man, what do you think about knocking some ideas around? I'm like, send the files over, and that's sort of where it kind of came from. The first song we put together was Locked and Loaded. And then it just sort of went from there. It just sort of steamrolled into an album. Just like, it was without really too much of a plan. It just sort of came together.
Who had the idea for Set Me Free? Because that honestly shocked me when I had it on. I just was kind of, doing things around the house, listening to it. And all of a sudden I'm like, wait a second, wait,
I know this song.
Your ears perk up and you're like, no, they're not. And yeah, what a great cover, by the way. That was fantastic. How did that one come to be on the record?
I think we tossed around a whole bunch of ideas because I think there was sort of like, there were definitely enough songs to have just not done a cover, but I think we really entertained the idea of like, let's do a cover. I mean, it's always kind of fun. Like, you You Really Got Me on the first Van Halen record, you know, like the idea of having that kind of touchstone. And for whatever reason, we kept coming back to Set Me Free. The Suite in general, we kept coming back to, because there's so many of the elements about Suite that sort of, you know, I mean, you're talking about three different guys who have a very similar taste in music, but also have their own vein of different things that they do as well. And I really like, you know, that song has so many elements about what I love about rock and roll, you know, that it's driving, big vocals, and the drum performance on that is pretty off the charts. And I think that Will Hunt is one of those guys that needs to show that off on as often as possible.
Yeah. I mean, Evanescence are great, but he's not doing that on...
He's not doing that. yeah.
Exactly. All right, Todd, I want to thank you so much for taking the time. This was fantastic. Loved hearing the stories, and would love to get you back one day to talk about so many more of these other bands and things you've done.
Please, I'd love to. That'd be great.
Fantastic. Thanks again. Have a good one, and I'll leave you to it.
Take care, brother. Bye-bye.